Welcome to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to what would be season 2 if we did seasons, but we don't do seasons.
Yep.
It is Brothers of the Serpent podcast. Coming
Winter.
to you, that's right. Season 2, maybe. Coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 formerly tangent-stained cube of science.
Winter has come.
Winter is... Oh, yeah. So how would he say that? If it's come. You know, he's always winter is coming. What does he do when it's come? Does he just give up? His job is done. Winter is here. Shit.
That's when the job begins.
Yeah. So there's a kind of a theme for today. Aside from the fact that like it's All Souls Day / All Saints Day / Day of the Dead / Halloween. The theme is going to be why? I think it's the science's least favorite question. They want to tell you how and where and when, but as soon as you ask them why, they just want to say, why are you even asking that? So, you've been listening to this Sean Carroll guy.
Yeah.
I hadn't listened to him before, but I have been listening to him now, and I agree that he's a great replacement for Feynman.
Quantum physicist.
Yeah, an eminent materialist, just like Feynman was.
Yep.
Like, I'm listening to this guy, and I'm just like, man, you're badass, dude, but shit. I don't know. There was a lot of stuff that he said that I felt was, he had ontological certitude on things that he didn't seem like he should have, so...
Hi, Laura.
Hi, Laura. It's cool.
Laura just walked into the studio.
She's
looking at us like we're dead.
Yeah. Those are ghosts.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I came up there to ask you, and then when I came back out, Kyle was like, I got it. So, sorry about that.
Okay, bye.
Bye. So all of our previous episodes are now dead. I went back and deleted them. The project folders, not realizing that all of
the little clips and shit that we used,
were the audio files were in those project folders, and now those are gone.
Right.
And so I still have bumper music because the bumper music was located in other project folders
that you did not delete. Yeah.
Whoops.
That's
so
all right.
we had Laura come out and do a quickie.
Yeah, quickie for the intro.
On the intro.
Which is why it sounds slightly different.
Yeah.
But it's better.
And I used a different mic and had brand new problems, and I kept messing with it, and then...
And the moon was like waxing gibbous or something.
Yeah, so Russ went in to ask her to do it again, and then we started.
Yeah.
And
I'm like, hey, can you come out
and
and just kind of do this one more time? She's like, sure. I'm like, sweet. And I go out and we just start recording. She opens the door and she's like, what the fuck?
Comes in smiling and then suddenly...
Yeah.
Whoa, shit, what's happening?
Not what I was expecting. So, I don't know. Like, I really dug a lot of his stuff on his ways of explaining things. But at the same time, he was just as annoying as Feynman.
Yeah, I pretty much expect physicists to be materialists because that's their specialty. Their specialty is materials, and they look down to the finest, most minute aspects of material and see, that they're trying to figure out how it works. And
yeah, but there's a specific, I think there's a specific kind of physicist who is a materialist, and that's because just like Sean Carroll and like Feynman, they do not want to talk about why, and they find all kinds of ways of avoiding it. Like Sean Carroll not only believes in the multiverse, but he also goes with the many worlds theory. So in other words, he uses these things to avoid asking why at every possible turn. He never has to ask it because he has these answers. I don't have to ask why because the multiverse answers why we have this particular universe. I don't have to ask why the electron does this as opposed to that when we look at it, because the many worlds theory does everything every time, you know. So he doesn't want to talk about why, and he has these thought forms that allow him to not do that.
The other thing he talks about though is, I think it's called Bayesian reasoning. Is that the right word?
I haven't heard that one yet.
I don't know if it's the name of a guy.
Okay.
And it's a way of reasoning where you're never actually saying, yes, this is true, and no, this is
false.
not true, or whatever, or this is impossible and this is possible.
Yeah.
You're only saying, what is the probability that is possible?
Yeah.
Right.
And my question is always, what is the probability that you actually know the probabilities?
You don't. But the way you use the reasoning is like, somebody can say, we have non-local, non-material souls attached to our bodies.
Yeah.
And you can say, okay, well, I don't, like, regardless of your bias, you can be like, well, what's the probability of that? Like, and you look for things that either support it or don't support it.
Yeah.
And like, you get to a point to where you can say, well, I think it is more likely that it's all material.
Yeah.
And less likely that there are these non-local things attached.
Right.
And you can keep looking for evidence. And so one of the things he talks about is, like, for certain things, you can't even really get close to finding like a really high probability of something.
Yeah.
But for a lot of things you can, but you'll never be able to get 100%.
Right.
So
yeah. He always says, well, you have to leave the possibility of maybe.
Right.
But
So
he's not. Really.
You get close to something. Let's say you're at 90%, then you can pretty much, like,
and then
you
Trump
could spend
wins.
the rest of your life. Yeah. You can spend the rest of your life looking for the 10% that you're missing, or you can say, well, I can pretty much accept that as you know,
Yeah.
that's most likely true.
Yeah,
and I'm gonna move on.
And when I'm listening to him, I hear him doing that, and he's doing it easily because he has all of these like constructs that he uses to avoid looking at evidence that would otherwise exist. Like, in other words, the many worlds theory completely removes a shit ton of questions that you would have to ask. There's zero evidence for the many worlds theory, but it's convenient, right? And like, as a mathematician, he also finds it beautiful. In other words, it gives you symmetry. Everything happens. There is no like, why did this and not that? It's all, right? It's very beautiful to a mathematician that it spreads out into this enormous fractal. So like, he does this at every turn, and thus avoids ever actually getting close to where he could see evidence for things that he doesn't believe in, and that's why he never finds it. And then he has this like almost 99% certitude. I heard it all throughout. Like, you know, he's giving these explanations, and I'm just like, yeah, man, but you've set it up so that you can't see the evidence.
I don't get that impression, but I know that I
don't think he did it on purpose.
He's a materialist.
Yeah. So being a materialist, how would he even arrive at places where he could think about something like a soul? He just doesn't think that way, and his bias is to, like, that's, even if he's like, okay, I really genuinely should try to answer this question, he's never going to be interested in it enough to sit down and ponder what it could mean, how it could work, how it could connect, because he's not interested in it. So he's never going to, you know, I
didn't get that impression either, because he does talk about, like, I can't name what videos or whatever that I was listening to, but there's quite a few where he talks about the possibility of spirit and all that, and all the time he's saying, like, yeah, I mean, it's possible, but I don't think that's not my particular viewpoint. I kind of look at it like this, and I think about these things, but it is possible, like, that's kind of the way
he's always said. That he always says you have to leave, because we don't know for sure on anything, so you have to leave open the possibility that this may be true, but I really doubt it. You know, it's basically what he says. Like, I
don't find a problem with that.
I find it highly. No, I don't either. I'm just telling you my impression of him. I'm not saying it's a problem. He's but it makes me completely suspect his entire quantum analysis because of that. Because, like, he totally misses the concept of consciousness being fundamental. Now, I know that there's no certitude in that either. But he, like, went through the whole, like, okay, so here's how they messed up the explanation of the collapsing wave function. It doesn't work like that. This is what's actually happening, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, yeah, but you're completely ignoring other stuff that doesn't work like that does give you this evidence. Like the fact that people can think at random number generators and change them. Like, that isn't I mean, if there's some kind of like interference pattern happening there, how and why is that happening? Like consciousness is interacting on a basic level that isn't through an instrument. It isn't because we're aiming a camera at it with other waves coming out and turning it into an interference pattern. Somebody's just sitting there and thinking at it, and it may not even be at that time. They could like sort of store it in a storage box that they open up a month later, push a button, and then it changes the randomness. Like that is in the quantum realm too. But so like the fact that he completely misses that makes me just question his entire interpretation of the quantum realm. Even though like it's his mechanical explanation of it is awesome. It makes it so much clearer, and like I love how he kind of like gets annoyed. You know, he's like, yeah, so this is the part where I get annoyed because this is where people who are too lazy to really understand it have then tried to explain it and botched it. Like that stuff's funny. That's hilarious. And then he explains it much more clearly and it makes sense. But he also, I guess I haven't listened to him enough to see what he's going to say about quantum teleportation and entanglement. I don't know how he's going to handle that. I also don't know what he thinks about the string theory. Has he said anything about that stuff?
Yeah, he said that it doesn't really work with the newest data they have in quantum physics. Huh. Like its string theory has basically, it's still extremely popular, but it is not viable anymore as a theory.
Wow.
Or there are very large problems.
He's claiming that there's like observational evidence that is completely in contradiction with string theory.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Wow. Because I was listening to somebody explain.
Like I think he was comparing it to quantum field theory, which is now which is the standard model today. Like
for quantum physicists, who none of which agree with each other. At least that's what he says. He's like, none of us agree. There's no consensus, so you can't really say, even though it's like sort of the cutting edge science of physics, we can't say what it is because none of us agree. But we always fight with each other.
But he said like unequivocally that quantum field theory is the
that's the operational model right now. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the best thing that they have right now
for predicting. Yeah. That's what he said. Yeah.
So, talked about string theory in comparison to that and how string theory just has like big problems. And he's not saying that it's not true. Again, he's just like,
right. He told
it's unlikely that this is going to work out because there's huge problems with it now.
Yeah. And he tells he has this great thing about truth. Like what he talks about, or maybe that was the other guy I was listening to. Maybe that was the other dude and not Sean Carroll. The one that was talking about truth and how he finds it to be a very not a certitude. In other words, that somebody can have an idea that is true, but it is not true in the case that they're telling it or using it.
Yeah, that was
that's the other guy. Okay, yeah. I listened to those
Weinstein.
I listened to those back to back. So
Eric Weinstein, I think.
Confused maybe. Yeah, so that was a great point because he talked about several times because he's several times in physics this happens where somebody has an idea and it really strikes them as badass and they sort of publish it, and it turns out after like all this, a lot of people glom onto it. They're like, wow, that's great, and then they do a bunch of experimentation and discover it to be falsified, except that it isn't really. What they falsified was that guy's so he has this beautiful idea that he then turns into a narrative. In other words, he says he has this fundamental concept of like dimensions being wrapped up on themselves and being really tiny. And then he tries to describe this enormous system that they then go and falsify. It doesn't work, right? Well, then later, like almost half a century later, the same idea pops back up of just the part about the dimensions being wrapped up in themselves, right? In other words, and then they start applying it in this completely different case, not at all the way he was explaining it. But when they applied it here, it worked extremely well, and it started to pop out equations that we already knew about. Like, in other words, it started to pop out things, our equations for explaining the electromagnetism and the strong and weak nuclear forces were just coming out of it like automatically, like sort of implying that they were plugged in correctly, right? So in other words, that guy's idea was not false. It was true, but he constructed a story out of it that was not entirely accurate. Right. And so the dude talked about him. He was like, I think of him as like scaffolds, right? It's an intermediary step between the enormous badass stone wall and nothing. The scaffold isn't the wall. And it's not so it's not the truth, but you have to have it to get, and if somebody just comes in, it's like, that's not the real wall, and knocks it the fuck down, then you're never going to get the wall, right? So I thought that was a very interesting concept.
Yeah.
That there's a kind of an authoritarian totalitarianism of truth that can be destructive, right? And he said that Feynman was guilty of this.
Yeah.
That was interesting. He's like, Feynman was like, you know, if experiment shows you to be wrong, you're fucking wrong.
Right. The example I remember was that he was talking about how he was looking at these particles, and he was like, everything must have an anti-particle or an opposing particle.
Right. Symmetry again. Yeah.
And so he made the false assumption that I think it was
somebody tried to say
the
that
proton and the neutron were.
Somebody tried to say that the proton was the anti-particle of the electron.
That was the guy. Yeah.
Yeah. He was like, well, they were like, no, because it's way too.
But this was like a long time ago, right. And like he kind of set it up like that.
They discarded the entire
the entire premise. But then later they found out that there were all these anti-particles for every particle.
Yeah.
He turned out to be right.
Right.
But the way the guy was explaining how this happened was that his version of the story was incorrect, but the actual fundamental aspect of the story was true.
Yeah, like I saw it as like he has this fundamental idea of like, wait, every particle, because of symmetry, every particle has an anti-particle. Right? That's the fundamental concept. Right. And then he's all excited. He's thinking about it. He's like, wow, so maybe the proton is the proton is the anti-particle of the electron. And he says that stupidly, and then people say, all right, we'll test that, right? Not anything else, just that part. They test it because we know we can test, we can see electrons and protons, so they test it. It's false.
And they find out one of them had like way more mass than the other one.
Yeah, the proton is far heavier than the electron, even though their charges are diametrically opposed. So they're like, no, that's not correct.
Yeah,
entire idea
theory
wrong.
Theory
wrong. False. Yeah, completely falsified. Throw it away. And it didn't come back up until way later when somebody found the positron, which is the actual antiparticle of the electron. It is a particle with the same mass that is positively charged, a positron.
Yeah.
And you know that stuff is antimatter, right? The antiparticles are antimatter. If you construct atoms out of antiparticles so that the protons are negatively charged, and of course the neutrons, they're just fat assholes. They get to stay the same. They don't have a. I think the quarks may be arranged differently in there, but there's no charge in the neutron. So you just have the same number of neutrons and their quarks are a different triangle shape or whatever. And then your electrons are positively charged and you can build entire molecules out of this shit. That's antimatter.
Yeah.
And it's completely opposite. And so if you let them touch, they will annihilate 100%.
Yep. They will unwind each other.
It is called full energy conversion and it is incredibly destructive.
Yeah. We just need 2 atoms of that shit.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
The anti-bomb.
And there's a weird question about that too. Like, there's a whole bunch of, when you dig down into this kind of physics, you find all these fascinating questions. Like, why is there anything? Because, like all things considered, in the Big Bang, an equal amount of matter and antimatter should have been created, which means they should have annihilated each other and left nothing but. In other words, the arrow of entropy should have been very quick and long and fast. Like all of this stuff annihilates, and then you have just nothing but heat waste spreading outwards into nothingness. No mass left, right? And yet somehow all this annihilation takes place, but there's a little bit of what we call matter left, and almost all the antimatter is now gone. So there was a little bit more matter than antimatter generated in the Big Bang. Why?
Well,
they're like, don't stop asking that question.
If elastic universe hypothesis is correct, perhaps then it is that whatever explosion happened in the Big Bang or whatever, it wasn't so much about making matter than resonating fields.
Right.
And so it doesn't.
And I think they're almost saying that too. They just don't quite see it fully as that. Because they're talking about the patterns they see.
Yeah, so like let's just say that you take a bunch of matter and a bunch of antimatter, like 2 bowling balls, one made of antimatter, one made of matter, and you go out into empty space and you throw them at each other.
Right.
And they, quote unquote, completely annihilate. But the explosion is so ridiculously powerful that it actually resonates fields that are no longer, that haven't been moving.
Yeah.
They haven't been, so like with the Large Hadron Collider,
because they're getting power levels that are so high.
Yeah, they've got these really high power levels, and they take these tiny little particles, and which are basically like little pockets of energy, and they smash them together, and that explosion,
they get dissonant
it's
notes.
Minute, but it's so powerful that it actually shakes mediums that are sitting still.
Yeah,
and so they see these what they think are
New
or
particles.
what they thought were new particles, but really they're just resonances in these fields that
really
were not
loud.
yeah, but they're resonance in fields that were sitting still, that weren't being moved.
Okay, yeah.
So like the two bowling balls hit each other, and the resulting explosion is so powerful that it creates matter,
Okay.
quote unquote matter, because
It creates it directly from the energy of the explosion.
yeah,
which is what
the
Big
energy
Bang
of the
was supposed to have done,
explosion resonates, the ether or whatever,
Yeah.
various fields in new ways, and so new matter is created. And so if you had an empty universe and these two bowling balls, perhaps you could create a whole brand new system.
Yeah, but still in that situation, you would still want to ask, how do you end up with at the end of everything? Because that sounds like you end up with a cycle of explosions, right? Because you throw the bowling balls together, they have this enormous explosion. Patterns appear in this immense dense energy, and then new matter is created. Some of it's antimatter, and then you have the same cycle again. They annihilate, and it goes back and forth and back and forth. And why do you end up with some dust of matter and not any antimatter left? Like, is it?
I guess what I'm thinking is that something will be, or it's possible, I guess, that some of the energy will be sustained. In other words, in the explosion, you're not going to have like the exact same result as what caused the explosion, like two equal parts of completely opposite energy. You take the two, like, in other words, you have the two equal and opposite things, and they result in a net positive because of the
It's
energy,
full energy conversion. Yeah,
Yeah.
That's how I think of it.
right. So the full energy conversion of these two equal and opposite things actually results in a net positive result.
Okay.
So the
I see what you mean. I know
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
talking. I know what you're saying. Yeah, that there's a net. In other words,
I shouldn't say positive. There's you've got something.
You have to
at
run
the
it.
end.
You just run everything through E equals mc squared to find out what the energy level is going to be, right? Because on one side of the equation you have E energy, on the other side you have mass times the velocity of light squared. It doesn't matter whether it's antimatter mass or just regular mass. It's m.
Right.
So if I have these two bowling balls, m equals the weight, the mass of those two bowling balls. I multiply that mass times the velocity of light squared, and that's what E equals. That's the amount of energy that's going to come pouring out of this explosion.
Right.
So it's going to be enormous.
So
right?
you could say that if there was no other universe around and it was just these two bowling balls of matter and antimatter, then let's say briefly, a couple of 100 billion years or whatever, there was a time during this explosion where there was where on the way to high entropy, there was like incredibly complex systems
Absolutely.
in the explosion.
Yeah. And I
So
mean,
that's kind of like,
also the whether you call it quantum field theory or, and I don't even know, like, are we explaining all this stuff enough for I can't even remember now. Are we just randomly
just
talking?
skip to hour 2 'cause
Yeah.
we'll probably end up doing the second segment on the same shit.
Okay, so like the actual space-time, like, so you have this space-time thing, and it can only hold, each piece of it can only hold so much energy, and so you have this whether it's quantum field theory or what do they call it, the 0 point or whatever. So there's all this stuff happening on it, and then if you dump that much energy into it from this explosion, maybe, because this is, I think, what they think about the Big Bang, that in certain areas space-time itself warped in strange ways, and that caused local inconsistencies in the otherwise totally homogeneous energy output, right?
Yeah.
And that's why, so 14 billion years later, we're looking at the sky with like the Kepler satellite, which is like, it just looks in the deep infrared, right? It tries to ignore all the bright shit, and it's just looking at the background, all the dark, because they're trying to map the background radiation, which is basically the leftover stuff from the Big Bang. And there's enormous patterns in it that, if you kind of go rewind everything back, they started out as something ridiculously small, but it results in this huge,
Yeah.
like when bread dough rises, if you put some little patterns in it and then it rises, you have this enormous pattern.
Yeah.
Or like blowing up a balloon. So they see that stuff.
Yeah, or put shaving cream in a vacuum chamber. A little dollop of shaving cream in a
it's
vacuum
like-
chamber. It's like, bam! It's
And you're like, that's universe. Yeah. So okay. So
And if you put a piece of little grain of sand on that dollop of shaving cream and then do it, it starts really changing.
Catastrophic.
Yeah.
Yep. You really have messed up everybody that has to live in that model. Hell of a little
But
guy.
yeah, I see what you're saying. So like, I'm trying to visualize what you're saying.
Yeah, because I always have to. For me, total energy conversion is almost completely. It's so energetic that it's homogeneous by nature.
But if
space itself is getting torn and ripped and shit as this is happening, you can see how patterns can begin.
Yeah, well, and that's what I was going to say too, is that if whatever these fields are, these quantum fields, we don't really know much about their properties other than that things travel at certain speeds in them and whatever. It takes certain amounts of energy to move them.
Yeah.
You know? So like they may have like at ridiculously high energy levels and ridiculously high compressed areas of ridiculously high energy, they may act in strange. You might rip one.
Yeah.
For example.
Actually, yeah. Yeah, I
don't know.
So basically, you can say that in the center or inside this almost so enormously energetic events that we can't even imagine them. That within them, things can happen that can result in enormous patterns later on that can have surprising effects, right?
Yeah.
That then end up so if some little thing like that happens in the Big Bang that results in this like tiny heterogeneous piece of the Big Bang, otherwise completely homogeneous, right? There's this little part that's not quite like any of the rest of it. Down when it's still like only a centimeter inside, when the whole universe is like a centimeter across, right? The Big Bang has started, but it hasn't been going very long, like fractions and fractions of a nanosecond. And the whole universe is a centimeter across. Inside that little tiny thing that contains all the fucking energy of everything in the entire universe, there's a little inconsistency.
Yeah.
And that single tiny fucking inconsistency that is basically a representation of a piece of space-time that can't handle all this energy, right?
Yeah.
It just can't handle it. So it starts to flap a little bit. As the entire thing expands, that one event can result in why there's some matter left over when all the antimatter is gone, and why that shit begins to spin out into galaxies. In other words, it results in everything that we see.
Yeah.
That one little fucking tiny error.
Yeah.
The bad note in the fucking,
Yeah.
in the initial resonance.
So one of the along that, one of the ideas in the Sinoverse poem,
Yeah.
slam poetry poem,
Yeah.
is that this idea that the Big Bang was actually this tiny,
Yeah, it was
ridiculously
a
small
singularity
event. Right. It wasn't like some massive universal
No.
explosion. It was
No.
just a tiny little inconsistency.
Yeah.
In a singularity.
Right.
And so it kind of takes in this idea that space and time were the sort of entropic result of that inconsistency.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So that those in other words, it needed more dimensions to exhaust.
Right. It was like
the
not
energy.
enough something.
Yeah, not enough
Of
everything or anything to deal with this inconsistency.
I'm trying to explode here, for God's sake.
So like I imagine it kind of like what you're saying, where this web, basically the explosion that we look at as the Big Bang was really a 4-dimensional explosion.
Yeah.
It was. It resulted in space because it needed that.
Right.
I
I follow that model too. That space
Exhausted.
itself was created along with. So in other words, because they talk about the inflationary event, right?
Yeah.
And it's still kind of going on. The space is inflating, but like you start out with no space. There isn't any space, and then suddenly something needs desperately to explode, but it has nowhere to go.
Right.
So because it generates its own explosion area.
Right.
It's dragging the space along with it.
Right, and that's not enough.
Right, it's
So
not enough.
so it does it for a while.
Yeah.
Right, and therefore time.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like,
so.
yeah, I can't do this all at once, guys.
Yeah, I can't do it only in 3 dimensions.
Right.
That's not enough.
Yeah.
It must take a duration.
Yeah. Like I know I just invented those 3 dimensions, but I need another one. I need time to do this.
So one of the other ideas in Elastic Universe that we've talked about, and we haven't really fleshed this out a whole lot, but that is that there's this idea that space is expanding everywhere
Yeah.
might be the result of, or that maybe not the result of, or I don't know. Another way of looking at that.
Yeah.
Another way of looking at that is the overall resonant tone of the universe is dropping.
Right. So you start out with something extremely tiny and like incredibly high pitched. Basically, if you're going to think of it in terms of sound, it's like, but then as it expands, right? And as that frequency changes, the things that can exist within its own harmonics also shift.
Right.
And so that results in like the increasing complexity of things that we see over time. Like you need time also to increase the complexity, but as the resonance shifts, it allows new forms to take place.
Right. And in acoustical physics, like when you have a fundamental note, resonant note.
Like the acoustical physicists are like the guys way down at the end of the hall with the dirty office. Nobody cares about them.
One chair.
Yeah, they don't even have a blackboard.
A drumstick.
Just a trash bag.
But I shouldn't say that in acoustical physics. I just when you have a fundamental tone, a fundamental note of something, right, is the lowest possible resonant frequency of that thing. So if you had a bell.
Yeah.
The size of the bell, the mass in the bell is going to determine the fundamental, what that lowest note is. But
the bell,
it has all these higher harmonics, and the frequencies of the higher harmonics go on and on forever.
Right.
Because you can continue to divide that bell equally.
Right.
Over and forever.
Yeah.
So that it contains within it all these higher frequencies. So in other words, the lower the fundamental note is,
the more resonances you can have. Yeah, and I thought of that too.
In a medium.
Yeah,
so if you think about it in terms of if the bell is the medium,
right,
it can only
vibrate in certain ways. Yeah,
you can only divide it by however many atoms it's made of.
Yeah,
or whatever.
Yeah, once you get to that point, it's like I can go no higher.
Yeah, I can't. There's nothing.
I can't even.
I can't even. But anyway, so the medium. Whatever these quantum fields are, they have to have some. They have to be made of something. Maybe not things or whatever, but I imagine them as
they have a property.
Yeah. Some type of property that results in harmonics.
Yeah.
And so if the tone, what I was getting at earlier, screw all that. I can't explain it. Can't even think about it. But if the tone is dropping, then the pattern of resonance would be expanding everywhere,
and they would be shifting across form, right? Because as the tone drops, the harmonics will, like, if I always imagine it in terms of cymatics, the tone dropping in this fucking pattern is shifting. So it not only is it expanding, but it's also it's adding parts to it because now it can have new resonances. The pattern, the overall pattern as a whole will also change nature. Will shift to new forms, and like that's exactly.
And if you have these massive galaxies that aren't expanding, but they're actually pretty well contained, right?
Yeah, at this point,
they may be adding different secondary effects to that expansion and causing certain areas where there's like big clusters of galaxies not to expand so much as other areas.
Yeah, and like because of elastic universe theory, I now think of galaxies as not as spiral arms, but as having this long life term. Like, because when you look at them in the beginning of the universe, they're little blobs and shit. They're not beautiful and spirally and stuff. But over time, and as the galaxies get closer to us, basically, because that's getting closer to us in time as well, they shift, they change, they take on different natures. You begin to see these ones with two big arms. They're called bar galaxies. Right?
Yeah.
They have a central thing, and then they got these two big things coming out, and then those begin to curl, right? And they also run into each other and cause a bunch of havoc. But then you end up with these gorgeous, like really close to us, like we look at Andromeda, which is right next to us, and it's just amazing spiral.
Yeah.
So to me, and that's also an increasing complexity, right? The initial blob is not. It's got a bunch of complex shit, stars and all that stuff. It's complex in and of itself, but it's like a single cell. That's not a very complex life form, even though it is complex, right? But as time goes on, you see these galaxies become complex in their macro structure, which they didn't have initially.
Right.
And to me, that's an excellent depiction of what's happening. I also liked the the whole hidden curled dimensions thing, because they were talking about how we don't know what form they would take or what shape, and I'm like, oh well, we probably could figure that out pretty quick. Because thinking about it in terms of elastic universe, I don't know. When I was listening to those guys talk about it, and they're like, and so this is the part we don't understand. We don't know how to answer it. I'm like, well, that sounds pretty easy to figure out, coming from the elastic universe idea, and how they would shift over time, because they were talking about that too. How at the beginning of the Big Bang, these curled up dimensions would have a specific form. But then over time, you see these fundamental phase changes that the universe takes on, right? It has phase changes that it goes through that are very definite in terms of like right after the Big Bang, they call it the Dark Ages.
Yeah.
Right, because the universe is so dense there that all the light is generated, because it's an enormous explosion. All the light is generated and can't get out. So we see it as just it's black, right?
It's like attenuated, like in water or whatever.
Yeah, and then suddenly it has the whole thing has expanded and cooled enough to where it just suddenly all at once becomes transparent, and the light's all comes out of it, and like so. Then that begins
like the fog lifts,
right? You know? That is the cosmic microwave background, is this sort of foggy, very dim all around. It's everywhere. That's the very first thing that we can see from the early universe, and then after that, stars begin to form. Right, and then they start to explode, and that throws. Suddenly, now we have more complex. The stars start to make more complex elements, because at first there's just hydrogen and helium.
Yeah,
and that's it. So it's a very, very high pitched universe with few with few harmonics. It's so fucking high pitched that the harmonics are very few, and you just have these very simple, non-complex forms of hydrogen is like a single proton, one electron. That's it. There's nothing else. But then the stars begin to form, and then they begin to cause fusion, and they make everything up to iron, and then they explode and make everything all the way up to gold, and all the way across. They generate the entire.
See, that seems to suggest to me that, because we're making more complex, or the universe is making I don't know. It's not us, but
the universe is making
It's making more complex. Sort of combinations of these quantum energy pockets or whatever. That the idea of, well, there should have been matter and antimatter or an equal amount made in the very beginning is sort of invalid. Like it's like that energy output caused the existence of these energy pockets, and then the secondary effects of those collecting together and creating stars and all this kind of stuff starts combining them. So they're still being used, like the fundamental particles
absolutely
that were created. So you could say,
but just be clear that all the antimatter stuff happens in the Dark Ages. It's long done by the time anything stars take place.
Yeah.
Like, it's gone. Like, there's no antimatter left. Unless there is. There might be really terrifying pockets of antimatter out there where, like, one day we fly to it and just annihilate.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to land on this,
Right. Well, I want to make another point about this. Anyway, we got to take a break.
We need to take a break. 7 minutes over, which is okay.
Yeah. 7 minutes and 77 seconds.
7 minute abs.
Wait a minute. Wait.
That was wrong.
That's a snake minute. Snake of the Dead, Day of the Snake, Snake Bros podcast in the 10 by 10 by 10 inch cube of science with the door open because it's finally cool outside. We don't have to.
Cool.
We're not sweating. Well, at least I'm not.
I'm not either now. It's great.
At the end of the break or at the end of a segment, we don't have to turn on the air conditioner.
Yeah.
We can just open the door.
Open up the door and let in the dead.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
We're wearing sheets over our heads with little eye holes in them so we look like ghosts.
They're
snake ghosts.
They're brown sheets. Okay.
Just brown ghosts?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because there are other guys that wear sheets, and I'm just saying.
Is my sheet brown? I thought it was white. Holy shit. I can't see anything in here. Anyway. Okay, so I wanted to kind of go back to the matter-antimatter thing. Not really. Just in contrast with this matter-antimatter
And I should
idea.
say that the question of like whether...
No, you shouldn't. As a matter of fact, I'm saying something.
Yeah, go ahead.
No.
Just keep... I just want to clarify that the idea that there should be an equal amount is not... No one proved that. They just said that it seems like it should be that way because of symmetry. Yeah.
I wanted to actually talk about something in chemistry that I thought was interesting that talking about the matter-antimatter thing reminded me of. So sugar molecules have this specific geometry, and they're, all the atoms are arranged in such a way that...
You going left hand, right hand here? Is that where you're going?
I think so.
Yeah. That's
So
very strange, yeah.
So we can make sugar artificially, and when we do it, there's no control over which way it is, left hand or right hand or whatever. But it's not really left to right.
It's a mirror of itself. Like it works. Everything works if it's just a perfect mirror of itself.
Yeah.
So that's left. That's why they call it left right. It's but
if
you're looking at them laying like
it's
this,
not really left right because depending on which way you're looking at it, you can't tell which one's left and which one's right.
You have to put them together to see which one's left or right. And then,
but you have to be looking at them from a specific angle.
You have to decide which part is the top.
Yeah. Because if I was standing on this side of it,
Yeah.
we'd be
Well, you're
thinking
left-handed, so it wouldn't even matter.
Anyway, so all sugar in nature is one way.
Yeah, it's left-handed. Yeah.
And it's not left-handed.
Oh. Shit.
The only way to determine the difference between left and right is by some freaking
Arbitrary center.
weird mu meson particle that freaking spins off of a freaking some weird reaction in some kind of decay.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
It's there's actually no way other than that to determine the difference between left and right. Like, this is some problem that physicists were working on for a long time. Like, is there actually a difference? And they were looking everywhere. And because depending on your perspective, it changes. And there's no way to...
Well, I know if you don't have the other one, it's hard to tell which one you're looking at, right? Like, if you've just got the example of what nature's sugar, you don't know which one that is. You see what I'm saying? But once you've got them both... You could then set up an arbitrary set of coordinates and be like, okay, so here, this is the arbitrary right one, and this is the arbitrary left.
Yeah. You could just decide that this one's left,
right? And then after that,
or you could decide that one's right.
Yeah, but then after that, you can recognize the left and the right ones everywhere,
right?
Because you know.
But if you were talking to an alien, somewhere else in some distant system, and you don't
know left and right,
and so you were like, well, the one that's like pointed towards your left hand is the left one. Wait. Like, how do you know? How does he know?
Right.
It's like, well, okay. Then you'd have to describe like the human body and be like, okay, so the heart is on the left side.
Right.
But wait,
for some reason,
when you're facing forward, put it on the.
It's on your left.
How do you tell him? How do you tell him which way to go with it?
Yeah, wait, I got to tell him it's his.
So
left.
that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But anyway, the point is that in nature, this sugar or sugar is always this one way.
Yeah.
The molecule is always arranged in this one way. And when we make it artificially, it makes both.
Yeah.
There's no control over which, it could be mirrored, like you're saying.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of them. But then when we put bacteria in there that eat sugar,
it only eats the one part.
Yeah, they only eat the one that's in
nature kind,
that the nature makes.
Yeah.
In that direction. Yeah. So they can distinguish between the two.
Right.
So we can actually.
And we all know the leftists don't like the guys on the right, so they won't.
Yeah. So we can go like we can get this artificial sugar and then put this bacteria in there, and the bacteria will eat all of the nature type sugar, and then we'll be left over with this perfectly artificial sugar that
no one can
nature will not eat.
Yeah, that's right. So you can just stash it outside, and ants will leave it around and everything.
I just think it's interesting that when we were talking about matter and antimatter, that the universe seems to have a method, like a way that it does shit.
Yeah.
And then when we sort of try to synthesize something, even though it's within the universe.
Yeah, we're doing it wrong. So we don't have the part that synthesizes just that one kind. Yeah.
Right. So I was just kind of comparing that to the matter antimatter thing, and like maybe for whatever reason, that like little
There was
thing you were talking about, that little sort of like inconsistency,
Yeah.
resulted in all of this stuff just being made in this way. And yes, it's possible to make antimatter,
Yeah.
but that's not how it happened here. Maybe it did, but I'm just saying.
I mean, the very idea that that a shitload of antimatter was created in the Big Bang is also theoretical.
Right.
I mean, any antimatter explosions would have taken place long after the initial energy output thing, and so we wouldn't even know what we were looking at if we were seeing evidence of those explosions everywhere.
You have to be able to see
to know what you're looking at. Yeah, and we definitely can't see in the Dark Ages where that shit would have taken place. And I've thought about that whole. Now I feel stigmatized for calling them left and right.
No, you can't.
What do you even call it? What do you even call it? Like
I'm just trying to talk to you. I was trying to one up physics on you. Go ahead.
I have a mason that like bounces off the fucking. Yeah,
I probably got all those names wrong too, but there's some type of.
They have a process that they use to determine.
Yeah. They finally
And it's
found
like
this,
atomic.
It's some. Oh God. It's some decay.
Okay.
Right, and when this decay happens, this like weird particle that I'm not sure what the name is.
Okay.
Like comes off of like when if you have the structure or whatever, and you're like you've got the proton, neutron, all this other stuff over here, like it decays into like 3 different particles or whatever, and this one particle goes off and the spin is this particular direction every time, and it always, so like if you align yourself where you say, okay, you've got this particle in front of you, and where the decay, when that particle comes off, it's going away from you or something,
And then it flies in your face.
it will be then you know that you're not oriented correctly.
Yeah, or that you're looking at the other kind of sugar or whatever. Maybe.
I'm talking about in the decay, in whatever this way that they figured out how to determine, how to actually explain to some other person
Oh,
left and right.
okay.
Were we? I thought that's what you were talking about.
No, well, yeah, you were talking about how there's this way to determine which one it is. That's what I thought.
To make a distinction in nature between left and right. Yeah.
Right. So if you've got your nature sugar and you've got your orientation set up right, then the meson should always fly off in this direction, spinning this way. Right. Is that the kind of the concept?
Except it doesn't have anything to do with the sugar.
Well, yeah, just saying whatever your molecule is, like whatever the whatever
decay
it is. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, it's going to be decaying out of an atom, right?
Yeah,
Or a
yeah.
subatomic particle.
It's some kind of
Right, but you're aligning yourself to because the atoms aren't reversed, are they? I mean, we're talking about molecules here, chemistry. The molecules are what can be built mirrored, not the atoms, right?
Yeah. I was talking about the 2 different sugars are a completely different thing, other than the.
Oh,
the left,
you're saying the way to describe left and right, period. Is that what
yeah.
Okay. all
Had to
right.
do with some weird like decay.
Okay,
something beta decay.
Okay, yeah. I thought
I can't remember.
You're saying they're using that as a construct to explain to some alien life form. Here's what we're trying to talk about.
Yeah, this is the only way that they can that physics can actually use like the universe to actually make a determination of the difference between left and right. Is this one like beta decay or something? And there's this one little thing that comes off of it and has this spin.
Yeah.
If you're aligned with it in this certain way.
Yeah.
And that spin is always that way.
Right. And you're like, so that spin is whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought that you were saying that this decay will help you determine whether your molecule is to the left or to the right.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. It just gives you the concept of left and right, and then you can say, okay, so if it's going this way, then it's okay.
Then you can describe to the
my
alien
sugar's
which sugar is. That's right.
Yeah.
So first he has to set up the experiment to do this weird freaking beta decay
Right.
thing.
The alien's like, what the fuck are these aliens talking about?
Yeah.
And then the thing goes spinning off, and they're like, everything spins. They're like, like all the time. Like, what if their nature was to spin? They wouldn't even know what you're talking about. You know, like what are the aliens that were in that movie?
But the idea is that if they could observe
Yeah, I know.
the same way using the equations and all whatever all this stuff.
I'm just saying, like a fish in water. How do you explain a water to a fish? Like, I'm thirsty. What do you tell him you need? He's a fish. You're like, I need water. He's like, what are you talking about? What's water? It's all around you. Oh my God, not one of these. So if the alien's nature was to always rotate, he wouldn't fucking know what you're talking about when you're saying this thing comes out rotating. Of course it is.
Well, if he was rotating, then he would be looking at it, and then he wouldn't. And then
Well,
he'd
he
be
would have.
looking
He
at it
has
again.
eyes all the way around.
So he should still be able to see it spinning.
He has radial symmetry, like That's what I was saying. Those aliens in that movie that everybody was raving about for a while there. It's called shit. It's like Contact, but it was not. But they make contact with these aliens, and they have radial symmetry. They're like octopods or whatever, and that makes them have a very strange way of thinking about time.
Yeah,
there's no front or back, forward or backwards. They don't have that, and so
circle.
Yeah, everything's like you see equally to the rear of you as you do to the front, right? And so their language constructs. When the humans started trying to learn their language.
It's called Arrival.
Oh, The Arrival, yeah. It was a great short story. The humans start trying to learn their language, and the very act of the language is, of course, changing their brains, because that's what languages do when you learn them. And so the researchers learning the language begin to see the future and the past as equal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the one lady.
Like they both do it, yeah. In the original, I never saw the movie.
Oh, okay.
The original story, it's a male and a female, and they are like xenobiologists. And
This always happens, folks.
What?
Like, me and Russ will be talking about a story. I've seen the movie. He read the book.
Yeah.
I didn't even know the book exists. And I start telling him, he's like, no. This is how it goes. And I'm like, no. Then he's like, yeah, I never saw that.
I'm not talking about the movie. I'm talking about the book.
There's a book?
It's a short story, yeah. It's written in 1942.
Can't tell you how many times this has happened.
Or how many times I just like tell you're talking about something crazy, and I'm like, I read a science fiction book about that one time.
Yeah.
Because I've read like every science fiction in existence, at least up till the death of Arthur C. Clarke. But yeah, I've always probably read a science fiction short story about whatever you're talking about. Just any given topic, I've read about it in science fiction before. So they're basically just doing it in space.
And then he goes online and he reads all the comments.
Yeah.
And so he knows every different way that everybody pretty much looks at it. And so then you're like, well, I look at it like this. Yeah. And then finish.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, you're talking about when it's like this and this. Yeah, like that guy said it. Yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty cool idea, except for there's this problem. And when I was talking to that guy, he was like, yeah, I don't know about that part.
That's why I like when I actually come up with an idea that you haven't read about.
Yeah, I'm like, holy shit.
And there hasn't been any comments that have posed this idea, and you're just like, what?
Whoa. Then I go make the first comment and blow everyone's fucking mind on the internet.
I do have like a punch dance like after that. Russ leaves.
Go out and punch
Russ leaves quietly, and I punch dance.
I'm like, I gotta go think about this. This idea that I've never heard. I haven't encountered one of those in years. But this leads to the away from the physics into the why. Like we were talking about this. We took this kind of like unplanned long break, and like it. So during that time, I kept thinking that maybe we'll be doing the podcast this week or maybe the next one. So I kept planning stuff out, and then that didn't happen. And so like at one point I watched an enormous number of TED Talks. I watched one. I was like, that was badass. And then I thought like I've watched like 5 of these, and every single one of them is badass. How come I haven't watched more? So I just like got my YouTube thing on like every TED Talk and press play. And just for the days I was listening to them, 20-minute talks, and they were badass. Some of them weren't that great, but most of them were really good. And they're really condensed. Somebody who has this enormous amount of experience in some given field shows up and for 20 minutes tells you everything badass he knows about that field. Like it's really, it's a really cool idea. And one of the things that was discussed many times by people who were doing sort of the less scientific, more social science kind of thing of asking like, what are people doing and why are they doing things? And so they're talking about like motivations, or they're talking about like, what's the difference between people who succeed and people who don't? What is the difference between people who are generally happy and people who aren't? What is the difference between, companies like Apple and companies like that aren't Apple, and there was this sort of consensus between these people about motivation and about the way you approach things. And then also about, like for Apple, it was a great example. The guy was like, so there's these 3, he draws these 3 concentric circles, right? And he says the outer circle is the what, and then the sort of middle circle is the how, and then the very central circle is the why, right? And he's talking about this is like everybody has these things for whatever they're doing. Like whatever you're doing, you have a what you're doing, a how you're doing it. Which so the what you're doing is on the outside. People can look at you and watch you doing it and kind of see the what, right? Even if they can't tell what it is, but that's the what. It's on the outside. Like more occulted by the what is the how you're doing things, because you may have to have that explained, even though they're doing it right in front of you. It's not clear, But the why is totally occulted. It's completely hidden. It's in the center of the person that's doing it, right? Or the center of the company that's doing it. And that's the one that's the least often explained because people don't approach that. So he was like, so almost every advertising you see for any given thing, and he's talking about tech in general. So he's like, so you'll see an advertisement for a car company or for a new technology, and they say, look at our technology. You know, this is the what. Here's our technology, and blah 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 blah. And then they say, it'll do these things for you, and this is how we put it together. Don't you want to buy one? Right? And you're like, well, you know, that could be effective. But what Apple does is say they start with the why, right? They're like, we want to think differently. We want to make beautiful things that you want to take with you everywhere, and we want to change the world with them. And here's how we're going to do that. And here's what we're doing. Don't you want to buy these? And you're like, fuck yes, you know. So he was basically saying this changed his whole world, and the way he looks at everything. Like he also talked about Martin Luther King. He asked the question of how is it that 250,000 people showed up they were in the right place at the right time for the I Have a Dream speech, the most famous one he gave in the Washington Mall. When that was before social networking, this is like these people did not have access to newspapers and there was no advertising, and yet 250,000 people showed up, right? And he just kind of walked out there, and there was no event planner. Like, how did this happen? And he was suggesting that it was because when you explain the why, you get people on your side because they see what you're doing and they now have the why. And the why is always what motivates us, right? The what doesn't motivate you. I mean, it may in an abstract sense, like you're thinking, once I build this thing, I'll have the what. I'll have this thing. It's cool. But having the what is not the
but it's still a function of why. Like
right.
Having
the what is also a function of how. You've got to figure out how, right?
Yeah.
So the way people do things is they have the why first. So your internal motivations always start with the why, even if you don't realize it.
Yeah.
The why is in there, you know? And so you move immediately to the how. How am I going to do this thing that I'm driven to do? And then you end up with the what, right?
Right.
So we all do everything from that inner circle outward, and yet most of our communications with people, trying to sort of get people involved or get people interested or whatever, starts from the outside in, because we think of the way they're looking at it. And you say, so here's what I'm doing. Here's how I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Right? And you don't approach the why. And so they may be interested, but it's an abstract interest. They don't have the why inside them. In other words, but if you do give them the why, they suddenly have, at least in part, your same motivations. And they're driven a little bit, just like you. So the reason all those people showed up on the Washington Mall for that speech is because they did the advertising themselves. They had heard his whys in his other speeches, and now they were like him, going out and giving mini speeches to everybody that they knew. They were like, oh my God. And they're telling people, and they're getting them involved. And so there was just this enormous why motivation to show up there that was like grassroots, because it didn't have to have a central control, but it was because and the guy was like, it's because he said, I have a dream, not I have a plan.
Yeah.
Right? So he imparts the dream. You can impart the plan. You know, you get up there to your corporate director or whatever, and you're like, okay, so here's that plan. We're going to blah, 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 you know, but that doesn't motivate people.
Yeah.
But if you get up there and you say, you know, and this is what always happens. You see these movies, the war movies, and before the major battle, the general dude gets up there and he starts walking back and forth. He starts shouting and banging his palm into his hand, and he's giving them the why, right? That's what that speech is. It's the why speech. It's the women and children back home. It's the everything you trained for. It's the to protect your brothers in arms. In other words, he's giving them the why they're going to go out there and get shot at and keep doing it. You know, if he got up there and he was like, so we need to check all our equipment, and and then he gives them the whole plan. Like, that's not going to motivate him. That's not going to keep that guy from pissing his pants. But you get up there and he always gives this enormously motivating speech, and it's always about why we're doing this.
Yeah.
So that was really awesome to me, that whole thing. Because I was like, here's how you start a cult. Not really. Cults are usually have like fraudsters at their center. But anyway, I thought it would be cool to kind of do that with this. Like, why are we doing Brothers of the Serpent? Why are we doing this?
Yeah.
So What's the time here? Now I'm confused. I don't know.
Yeah, I forgot to start
I
the
don't know
timer.
what that clock means.
And so we got about 7 minutes.
Okay. So you want to roll off on some whys? We can switch back and forth.
Yeah.
I just gave this enormous monologue, so now it's your turn.
All right, enormous monologue. 7-minute monologue. Here it comes. I would just, before I get into this, like to say that I think that's badass. And while you're talking about all that, I'm applying the idea of communicating
The why.
the why in a lot of these things that I do. Like I'm also a musician and have a band and I make music to be published.
Right.
Why am I doing that?
Yeah. And I mean, you get people to follow you because they have their own motivations because they think you're badass, they think your music's great or whatever. But if you can give them some of your motivation,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
then they're really on your fucking side.
Like I've always dealt with the what.
Yeah.
And I don't
And
even
the how.
I don't even really go into the how.
Oh.
With
You're like, you should know this or get
It's
out.
like we've talked about like, well, we should do, sort of documentary footage of us in the studio. That would be the how.
Okay.
Like, how are we doing all this?
Or like, I was thinking how in terms of musically, you're like, you'll sit down with somebody and be like, okay, so here's how I wanted this to go, and here's how I want
With
this.
the band,
Yeah,
but I'm talking about with the people that we're publishing the music
Oh, okay, gotcha.
for just whoever,
Right.
the world,
Yeah.
putting it on the internet for
Yeah.
anyone to download,
I see.
and
You wanna
never
communicate the why to them.
like don't ever communicate why.
Yeah.
And like even like I did some I put my music on a website where the music was available in a search engine for people that make movies, and they can
Yeah.
search it and then they can basically license the music to put in their movies. And they wanted descriptions of the songs, like
Yeah.
what they were about and all that kind of stuff. And I kind of did that. Like I wrote
Yeah, I remember that.
sort of why this song,
Yeah.
but
What? You wrote like a little bit of what this
Yeah,
song
yeah.
and then why, yeah.
yeah, but not in general.
Yeah.
Why do I make music?
Right.
And so anyway, while you were saying that, I was just like, dude, that's like, I need to do that because I can immediately see in your explanation, thinking about your explanation, that is exactly what would get me motivated to join someone or,
Right. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes like, I'm watching somebody like kiteboarding and I'm like, I already know the why.
Yeah.
Like that's fucking awesome.
Yeah, well, maybe. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, because it's fucking awesome.
It just
Yeah.
looks fucking awesome.
I was
And
like,
like,
well, I kiteboard because I found out I could slice sharks.
yeah, well, wow.
Right. Now you know the why.
It just looks like badass to do.
Yeah.
But I mean, they're like what you were talking about with Apple or whatever, the or sort of in your description of somebody actually doing something in front of you, like they're, especially if it's art.
Yeah. You can see the what sort of.
And you can see the how
kind
a little
of,
bit,
yeah.
like how they're carving something
Yeah.
or whatever, but why are they carving it?
Right.
So that's really in music, like what's been really motivating me is why am I doing this? And this is something I've been thinking about for the past year or two, like very deeply.
Yeah.
Like, why am I making music?
Yeah.
And it's even led to like new songs and new lyrics because realizing like why actually is aligning with why I'm doing this podcast.
Right.
And I think I think this podcast has also made me realize, why I really want to do music, because when I was a kid and I enjoyed playing music, the why was very materialistic. It was well, but there was some.
Well, that materialistic thing was kind of there already.
But there was some deeper part that it was like, oh, I want to change the world, man. With my music.
Yeah, but
how?
But
and
yeah.
why? Like, what is it about the music that's going to do anything? And I
Yeah.
realized at some point that like that's dumb. Like,
also it's kind of clear. Well, I don't know, but I would say that it's clear to me that before you had even thought about any of that shit, so you didn't know that there was a material thing possible from this, or even like a change the
when I
world
was
thing. You're
really
still
young.
doing it. Like in
Yeah,
other
yeah.
words, there's a deeper why that has existed from the start.
that's true.
Yeah.
And that I can just say that I got great enjoyment from
Yes.
the beauty of it.
Right.
But later, like when I formed my first band, I was like, you know, fuck yeah, kick ass, like
Yeah.
become one of these rock stars that
Yeah.
that I think are badass.
Right.
And then some weird sort of not really fleshed out idea that like somehow my music is like going to be important in some way.
Right.
That I later realized like, no,
It's going to be Wild Stallion-esque. Change the whole future into a different thing.
it's just like, it's just, I'm just like writing these little songs about shit that I experience in my life. And I wasn't really looking at it in terms of art. It was really like what you and I do in this podcast and thinking about history, humanity and history, like in the universe and all of these things that made me realize why I do art.
Yeah.
And I think for me, why do art is no longer because it makes me feel good and like, you know, because I'm creating something badass that maybe other people will like. It's not about that anymore. It's about continuing or I guess creating something, and for lack of a better phrase, setting it in stone, like putting something down that actually has relevance to humanity in general and our time.
Yeah.
And
You're
then
constructing something timeless.
I'm trying to.
Yeah.
And I've talked about this a little bit, but it was really this.
Also, there's kind of I've been thinking about this recently too. Like, there's something in alchemy in art. Like, there's this, like, you know, the common sort of meme of the suffering. You know, the artist is always disturbed somehow, right? And he goes into his studio and he's like, rah, rah, and he fucking makes his art. So there's an alchemy there of taking sadness and turning it into a flower or something. Like,
Yeah.
You know, you take these negative things. I mean, they don't have to be negative. I'm just using the meme, but you take these things and you convert them into something beautiful. Or horrifying, or whatever, you know.
But see, that's what doing music has always done for me personally, is that I can have something that I'm upset about.
Yeah.
And if I write a song about it, it's like, bam, I'm done.
Yeah.
Like it fixes it. Turns that
Baby, I miss you. It's so cathartic.
it's like it fixes it in my head somehow. Like I'm okay with it, you know.
Yeah. You've expressed
I deal
it.
with it.
Yeah.
But so with the podcast, like there was an initial sort of surface reason why I wanted to start.
Because I was like, we're going to fucking do this now. You're like, okay, Jesus Christ.
No, the
Yeah, I know. I'm just.
it was kind of like that. We were talking about how we need to get into this now because there's other people that are doing it and they're getting together with each other, and we want to be involved in those circles of people looking into the ancient past and maybe get on board with some of them because we respect them and like their material.
Yeah.
And we feel like we have something to offer. And that was something you had told me.
I mean, we already do offer it. They just don't know. I mean, like, you know, I'm so involved in this stuff online that, like, you go to any website or any forum that deals with this stuff, and I'm in there somewhere. You can find me in there talking to people.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm heavily involved in Graham Hancock's website. Like, right now, I've got an enormous amount of posts that I have to answer because people are flipping out about the cart ruts thing that I put on there. I mean, like, that, I see how long that list. I was like, oh my God, I don't even have time to look at that. But yeah, so we do contribute because I have noticed how the things that we have thought of in our discussions, how people receive that. Because I'll go and type it out and be like, so what about this? And they're just, and like, they are really receptive to it. And a lot of times it's not anything anybody's thought before. Because we, you know.
And that's what I was saying, like, just to kick this whole thing off, this whole topic, is that the original, I would say this is more a surface why. The deeper why was there long before.
Yeah.
But the surface why was like, we need to just actually start putting something down, set in stone, recorded, that we can publish so that we can get involved in a new way with these other people who are doing a similar thing with podcasts, and join that
community.
Community.
Yeah.
And so I'm gonna stop there because we're needed to take a break, but but we can get into the
keep going on
to
that.
the better, deeper levels afterward.
More why. It's why of the snakes. Snake-wise.
Snake-wise. W-I-S.